I'm very well, Colin. Thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good. Well, thank you again for all your continued hard work working with the ECR Retail Loss as our food waste expert advisor. And today we're just going to talk about the whole, opportunity, problem, whatever we want to describe it, around donating to store colleagues. And it's something we've visited as a topic, quite a few years ago, and just recently we had an update this year. And it's particularly interesting because Professor Lisa Jack, and again, thank you for your help on the paper, has just, written her paper up on about the true cost of food waste in terms of understanding the hidden costs, which, in her calculations, are roughly about 1.8% of the sales. So if your food loss is, food waste is 3%, you've got to add another 1.8%, and that covers all the cost of, you know, identifying the products that need to be marked down, handling the donations, and managing that exit process. And I suppose one of the things that jumps out at you when you look at her analysis is that, donating to store colleagues would seem almost, after marking down, of course, it would seem almost the cheapest way for a business to donate products to humans. And yet we found in our survey that less than a quarter of retailers, we had about just under 40 retailers in the survey, just under a quarter of them actually donated product to their store colleagues. And the recent meetings we've had have tried to explore, well, what's going on here. And we had one retailer very proudly share their program that had been going since 2016. And then the other retailers sort of kind of added on and shared their thoughts as to why they didn't, or why they thought that this retailer could. Um, but yeah, you've been in this space for a number of years, many years, Richard. What's your reflections on this whole space around do you not, or do you donate to store colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, it's a topic close to my heart. It's something that I dealt with previously in previous roles and helped another business actually to roll out colleague donations. So, and the same narrative comes up time and again. I think people get blocked by the concern of fraudulent activity within that. And I think that is the bit that really just gets in the way of everybody. The interesting part to this, which is not something, it was brought up on our call, but I think the interesting part here is that what we have to remember is, of course, it is by far the cheapest, like you say, is within the paper that Lisa wrote, is that it clearly stands out as being the cheapest option, and yet still there's some nervousness about people adopting that. But the one thing that I always go back to is that maybe the point with colleague donation as well is there is an opportunity, because as a business what you want to do is maintain that product on sale for as long as possible, and I think this cuts across reductions and charity donations as well. Is that when colleagues are really up against it and have a lot of tasks to do, they sometimes start doing things that makes it easier for them and not necessarily right for trying to sell it to the customer. And what I mean by that is that even in reductions, if they've got a lot of reductions to do, they sometimes take them all out the back to get them done for various reasons. And sometimes they might be off sale for an hour or even more before they come back out on sale. So I think the key thing to remember here is the flow through to that point of colleague donation is that you're trying to sell it as a business first and foremost. And with the example that we saw with the retailer, what they've got to after 9 years is being able to keep that product on sale for the maximum amount of time until a colleague wants to go and take that. So I think they've actually got the holy grail of colleague donation, as well as eradicating all of those sort of worries around fraudulent activity. And yes, there is going to always be an element of risk that is going to play on people's minds that say, well, there may be some people that want to take advantage of that and find loopholes. But as they do in many other processes within stores, if you're that way inclined, you'll probably find a way to do those sorts of things anyway. So I think it is, for sure, it is definitely the right way to go about it. recording of colleague donation is always a bit of a challenge as well. So, normally if people are following that hierarchy and have a charity donation, they'll record the charity donation, and then it moves on to colleague donation, which would be the right way round to do it. But of course, when you donate to charity, you know when the charity's coming in, and you can book all of those products out. With colleague donation, people are finishing at different times of day. If you want to maximize on that, people are invited, in some instances, the retailer that we spoke to, inviting colleagues so they can come back in, even if they're not working at a certain point, after 9 o'clock, I think it is, that they can come and choose it. So recording that's quite difficult, because unless, like they have in their example where it goes through the till, you're reliant on somebody with a handheld device. Every time somebody turns up and wants one product, you've got to go and log into a handheld device to record it. So that is always going to be a challenge, and something that I found working with another retailer to record this was there's quite sometimes, not just on a handheld device, but the greatest example we have from the retailer is that tech integration, or the tech build that they needed to do for that, is quite considerable, and not everybody can get to the top of the priority list within their business.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly heard that if you are going to be a retailer that looks at this store colleague donation, selling it or treating it as a sale seemed a big decision, and the right decision.
Yeah.
Having a sort of loyalty card as well, I think tying that purchase to, a person also seemed to be a sort of must-have.
Yes.
There was even with this one retailer, there was consideration given to it's a 99% discount versus for free, and again that's another piece. I think there are categories, and again I've seen retailers do this. Some categories are perhaps more less dangerous, if you like, from a sort of bakery.
Yeah.
I think that there's never too much not to donate it to colleagues. So, starting on bakery seemed to be quite a neat way to get started in this place.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, to your point about, making it a discount or whether it's free, I think, in that example with the retailer we're talking about, the initial stages of that was the only way that we could work out how to do it was to reduce it to 1p. So there was a cost of 1 pence to pay, but it's a small cost. But then of course that does register as a sale and a reduction on your waistline. So there's still some back office sort of changes to be made to make sure that it understands that wasn't that everybody's reduced everything to 1p, because that would obviously change the forecasting and ordering system. So I think it's great that we have this example that's gone over 9 years now and come out the other end with absolutely the sort of platinum standard of what this would look like. So you can pick and choose which parts of that you can do or want to do without the risks and downfalls that may have been seen throughout that journey. So I think it was really valuable sharing that.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think and again, I think starting slowly on this, if there are concerns around the abuse, is a good way to go. I have to say, I mean, I hadn't thought about just some of the agility that this program gives you, and the example where I think due to some bad weather, like 100 stores were closed for a day or so. And suddenly you've got all this food that hasn't taken any notice of the weather and extended their own shelf life.
Yes.
And, of course, the charities are also affected by the poor weather and their ability to get to the stores. And so it really does give you that flexibility, if you like, that having a store colleague program where you can actually have at least a way of exiting a lot of the food to humans rather than having to throw it away. Whereas, you probably would be throwing it away if the charities aren't collecting. And so that seems a really big idea. And I think that they talked about 15 to 20% of all their surplus food that could be donated was actually going through the store colleague route. You mentioned earlier on about the sort of dilemma between, do you give it to charities first or do you give it to store colleagues first?
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
Well, I think it's yeah, it's not so much of a challenge unless you've been doing charity donations for a long time. You know, the one retailer that I worked with to launch Colleague Donation didn't really have a charity donation, so it's easy to do, and then you could bolt on charity donation. So it doesn't, you know, some people it doesn't really matter so as long as it's going to people, and there is enough, as we know, there's enough food to go around to be donated.
Bakery.
Yeah, for sure. But one thing that is that I know is not necessarily something that people think about, but when you present this to colleagues as, you know, I think you try not to describe it as a benefit, because the minute you describe it as a benefit, there's some sort of tax implications, I'm pretty sure. But when you present that and say, look, this food is available to you as colleagues, and even if extended to friends and family, however they manage to do that. But the key part here is that some people that don't need that food are in the store that can take it. And you could explain to them that they could take it and offer it to their neighbours and the community. So they could take it knowing that there's an elderly neighbour that may be in need of some of that food, and they can take it for them. And I think we don't do enough of that, if I'm honest, in all of the examples that I see, is that encouraging colleagues to do something good in their community would be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, there is Olio, of course, as you know, but that sounds a pretty neat idea as well. Yeah, I think that's that is interesting. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. Anything else that we think we should call out from, you know, what we know about this subject so far? You know, I think we sort of talked about you know, you can be advantaged with this if you've got some sort of loyalty card. You can got the tech to be able to put it through. You can have the sort of, you know, barcodes and all the rest of it to help. This particular retailer had a special thing on the markdown labels that said it was a store colleague program.
Yeah.
Start with bakery. It's sort of lower risk, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's always products available.
Yeah. I think you've got to show within your business that whatever it is, whether it is a marker on the label to show that we can see it's colleague shop, is that if you want to prevent that, the opportunists that want to fraudulently take other stuff, is that you have things in place and everybody understands it so that they don't take those opportunities. And I think that's really key. You know, if somebody wants to hide a steak and put a reduction label on it, they could do that. If you need a reduction label that has colleague donation indicator on it, then they can't do that. So therefore, it's less likely that they're going to try and take that opportunity to defraud the business that they work for. And I know it's a sad state that we think about that, but we do have to think about that. And also the point I made earlier is about make sure it stays on sale for as long as possible. The consideration when doing this is going, if you're in a position where you're going to have to store it out the back in a location, then you need to think carefully about at what point in time are you going to do that, because you're taking it away from customers and the availability from customers.
Yeah, very good. Well, look, no doubt we'll touch on this again. I mean, we've got, you know, 75% of retailers don't do this. So there's a lot that did, I think, express some interest in progressing with trials. So, you know, we'll catch up with this again in 12 months' time and see where we got to. But thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
And then we will see you next time. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.